Hi everyone, welcome to the channel After All That Years.
You think you know the person sleeping next to you after nearly 10 years of marriage. You think you understand their rhythms, their moods, the way they move through the world. I certainly believed I knew Linda, my wife of 9 years, until the evening everything I thought I understood about our life together crumbled in the space of a single conversation. It was an ordinary Tuesday in late October. I'd finished another long day at the accounting firm where I'd been working for the past 15 years, dealing with quarterly reports and client meetings that seemed to stretch on forever. The autumn air had that sharp bite that promised winter wasn't far off, and all I wanted was to get home to the warmth of our house and Linda's company. I'd even stopped at Morrison's Bakery on 5th Street, her favorite place to pick up a slice of their red velvet cake, thinking it might brighten what had been a particularly stressful week for both of us. When I pushed through our front door, calling out my usual greeting, the silence that met me felt wrong. Not the comfortable quiet of someone absorbed in a book or television show, but something heavier, more deliberate. Linda was standing at the living room window with her back to me, perfectly still, looking out at our small front yard where the maple tree we'd planted together 5 years ago was shedding its last leaves. "Hey, I'm back," I said again, setting my briefcase down and holding up the bakery box. "Got you something?" She didn't turn around, didn't even acknowledge I'd spoken. In 9 years of marriage, Linda had never ignored me like that. Not even during our worst arguments. She was the type of person who faced problems head-on, sometimes more directly than I was comfortable with. This silent treatment wasn't her style at all. I walked into the living room, my footsteps muffled by the carpet we'd picked out together 3 summers ago. "Linda, everything all right?" Finally she turned, and the expression on her face made my stomach clench. Her phone was clutched in her right hand, and she quickly slipped it into the back pocket of her jeans with a movement that seemed almost guilty. Her mouth was set in a hard line I'd rarely seen before, and her arms crossed defensively over her chest. "We have to talk," she said, her voice carrying a coldness I didn't recognize. Those 4 words hit me like a physical blow. Nothing good had ever followed that particular phrase in any relationship I'd ever been part of. I felt my pulse quicken as I searched her face for some clue about what was coming. "Okay," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on? Did something happen at work?" She shook her head, her dark hair swaying slightly. "I'm going out tonight, and I need you to understand that things between us are going to be different from now on." The words didn't make sense at first. Going out? Different how? Going where? With who? I asked, genuinely confused. "Linda, what are you talking about?" Her expression hardened even more, if that was possible. "It doesn't matter where or with who. What matters is that I need space to think about what I want from my life. This," she gestured vaguely between us, "isn't working for me anymore." I felt the floor seem to shift beneath my feet. Space? After 9 years of marriage, suddenly she needed space. "I don't understand. We're married, Linda. We've built a life here together. If you're unhappy about something, can't we talk about it? Figure out how to fix whatever's wrong?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't something that can be fixed with a conversation or a few changes around the house. I'm suffocating here. I need to feel like I'm living again instead of just existing." Her words cut deep, each one like a separate wound. "Feel like you're living? What does that even mean? I thought we were happy. I thought we were building something together." "That's the problem," she said, her voice rising slightly. "You thought, you assumed. You never bothered to notice that I've been dying inside for months." The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I had been working long hours, focusing on advancing my career, assuming that Linda was content with the routine we'd settled into. But dying inside, for months. How had I missed something that significant? "Is there someone else?" The question slipped out before I could stop myself, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Linda's silence stretched between us like a chasm. She didn't deny it, didn't rush to reassure me that I was imagining things. She just stood there, looking at me with what might have been pity. That silence told me everything I needed to know. "Linda," I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "if you walk out that door tonight, you need to understand what you're doing. You're not just taking space. You're ending our marriage." For just a moment, something flickered across her face, uncertainty, maybe even regret. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "I know," she said simply. She walked past me to the front closet, pulled out her black wool coat, and grabbed her purse from the table by the door. I followed her, my chest tight with a combination of anger and desperation that I'd never experienced before. "Don't do this," I said, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay calm. "Whatever's going on, whatever you think you need, we can work it out. Don't throw away everything we've built." She paused with her hand on the doorknob, her shoulders tense. For a heartbeat, I thought she might turn around, might reconsider. But then she opened the door and stepped out into the cold October night without looking back. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house with a finality that made my knees weak. I stood there in the entryway, staring at that closed door, waiting for her to come back, to tell me this was all some kind of horrible mistake. But the minutes ticked by, and she didn't return. That was the moment I realized my marriage. My life as I knew it was over. The hours that followed Linda's departure passed in a kind of numb haze. I wandered through our house, a place that had felt like home for nearly a decade, but now seemed foreign and empty. Every room held reminders of the life we'd shared. The kitchen table where we'd eaten breakfast together thousands of mornings. The couch where we'd watched countless movies. The bedroom where we'd made plans for our future. The slice of red velvet cake still sat on the kitchen counter where I'd left it, untouched and somehow mocking. I'd bought it as a small gesture of love, not knowing that my wife was planning to walk out of our marriage that very evening. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I kept picking up my phone to call Linda, then setting it down again, not sure what I would even say. What do you say to someone who's just blown up your entire world? Instead, I found myself scrolling through her social media accounts, something I rarely did. Linda wasn't someone who posted constantly, but she maintained an active presence on Facebook and Instagram. As I looked through her recent activity, I began to notice patterns I'd somehow missed before. There were new names among her friends and followers, people I didn't recognize. One in particular caught my attention. James Morrison. He'd liked virtually every photo she'd posted over the past few months, and his comments were consistently flirtatious. Beautiful as always, under a photo from her company's summer picnic. Lucky husband, under a picture from our anniversary dinner 2 months ago. I clicked on his profile, my jaw clenching as I took in the details. He was younger than me, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of carefully cultivated image that screamed social media influencer wannabe. His photos were full of gym selfies, expensive restaurants, and captions about living your best life and taking risks. The more I scrolled, the more connections I found between James and Linda. Comments that seemed innocent on the surface but carried an undercurrent of familiarity that made my stomach churn. How long had this been going on? How many of her recent absences, her late nights out with friends, had actually been spent with him? I needed to know the truth, even if it destroyed me completely. I pulled up Linda's text messages from the past few weeks, looking for clues I'd been too trusting to notice before. Most of them were mundane grocery lists, reminders about bills, plans for weekend activities, but now even the innocent messages felt tainted. I decided to reach out to her best friend, Jennifer, who'd been a regular part of our social circle for years. If anyone knew what Linda had been up to, it would be her. "Hey Jennifer," I typed carefully. "Linda mentioned she was out with you tonight. Hope you two are having fun. Just wanted to check that everything's okay." Her response came back quickly. "Hi, I'm actually at home tonight. Haven't seen Linda in a couple of weeks. Is everything all right with you two?" My heart sank. Another lie. Linda hadn't been with Jennifer at all. She'd been with James, or whoever else she'd been seeing behind my back. I didn't respond to Jennifer's message. What could I say? That my wife had lied about where she was going. That our marriage was falling apart, and I hadn't seen it coming. The rest of the night passed in a blur of mounting evidence and growing certainty. Every small detail I'd overlooked now seemed significant. Linda's new interest in her appearance, the way she'd started guarding her phone, her sudden need for girls' nights that apparently didn't involve her actual girlfriends. By the time dawn broke, I felt like a completely different person than I'd been 24 hours earlier. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and spent the morning trying to figure out what my next step should be. I couldn't confront Linda based on social media activity and suspicious behavior alone. If I was going to end my marriage, and it was becoming clear that's where this was heading, I needed concrete proof of what she'd been doing. That's when I made the decision to hire a private investigator. The office of Bradley Associates Investigations was located in a nondescript building downtown, the kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. The man who met me, Alan Bradley, was in his 50s with greying hair and the kind of calm, professional demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "I understand you have some concerns about your wife's activities," he said as we sat in his spartanly furnished office. I explained the situation as objectively as I could. Linda's sudden request for space, her lies about where she'd been, the suspicious social media activity. Alan listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "How long do you think this has been going on?" he asked when I finished. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe a few months. I feel like an idiot for not seeing it sooner." Alan nodded sympathetically. "You'd be surprised how common that is. People see what they expect to see, especially in long-term relationships. It doesn't make you an idiot. It makes you trusting." He explained his process: surveillance, background checks on potential romantic interests, documentation of meetings and activities. It would take a week or two to build a complete picture, but he was confident he could get me the answers I needed. "One thing I always tell my clients," he said as our meeting wrapped up, "be prepared for the truth to be worse than you imagined. It almost always is." I left his office with a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that Linda's behavior had some innocent explanation. But a larger part of me needed to know exactly what I was dealing with, no matter how painful it might be. The first results came sooner than I'd expected. 3 days after our meeting, Alan called with an update. "We have some significant activity," he said without preamble. "Your wife met with James Morrison last night at the Riverside Hotel downtown. My team documented their meeting." My stomach dropped. Hearing it confirmed was somehow worse than suspecting it. "How long were they there?" "About 2 hours. After that, they went to Murphy's bar with a group of his friends. The interaction was definitely intimate, not sexual in public, but clearly romantic. I thanked him and asked him to email me the photos, then sat in my car in the parking lot of my office building, hands shaking as I waited for his message to arrive. The first photo showed Linda and James in the hotel lobby. They weren't touching, but their body language told the whole story. She was leaning toward him, laughing at something he'd said, her face more animated and alive than I'd seen it in months. The second photo was worse. They were leaving the hotel, and Linda's hand was resting casually on James's arm in a gesture that spoke of familiarity and intimacy. The third photo, taken at the bar, showed them sitting close together, Linda's head tilted toward his as he whispered something in her ear. They looked like a couple. They looked happy in a way that Linda and I hadn't looked in years. I closed my laptop and sat in my car, trying to process what I'd seen. This wasn't just an emotional affair or a moment of weakness. This was a full relationship, complete with romantic dinners and social activities. Linda had essentially been living a double life. When she came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room. She seemed surprised to see me there instead of holed up in my home office as usual. "You're home early," she said, setting her purse on the kitchen counter. "I took the afternoon off," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "We need to talk." Something in my tone must have alerted her, because her expression immediately became guarded. "About what?" I stood up, holding her gaze directly. "I know about James." The color drained from her face, but she tried to maintain her composure. "Know what about James?" "Don't," I said firmly. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you don't know what I'm talking about. I know about the hotel, I know about the lies, I know about all of it." Her mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. "Have you been following me? You're really going to try to turn this around on me?" I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. "You're the one who's been sneaking around, lying to my face, having an affair, and you want to be upset that I found out." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. Not this time. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said quietly. "It just developed." "It just developed," I repeated bitterly. "That's your explanation? You accidentally fell into an affair with someone who's been flirting with you online for months." "I was lonely," she said, the tears now flowing freely. "You were always working, always focused on everything except me. I felt invisible in my own marriage. So your solution was to cheat on me instead of talking to me about how you felt, instead of suggesting counseling or making any effort to fix what was wrong." She looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I know it was wrong. I know I should have handled it differently. Yes, you should have, I said, my voice cold, but it's too late for that now. I told you the night you walked out that if you left, our marriage was over. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Her head snapped up, panic replacing the guilt in her expression. You don't mean that. We can work through this. We can go to counseling, figure out how to fix things. No, I said firmly. You made your choice, Linda. You chose him over our marriage. Now you get to live with that decision. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing, but I didn't move to comfort her. I was done being the understanding husband who made excuses for her behavior. This is over, I said again, then turned and walked to our bedroom, closing the door behind me. But the story didn't end there. The next morning, I received another call from Alan, and what he told me shattered even my diminished expectations of Linda's honesty. We need to meet in person, he said. There are some developments you need to see. An hour later, I was back in his office, staring at a new set of photographs spread across his desk. James Morrison isn't the only one, Alan said gently. There's another man. His name is Richard Sterling. He's 54, owns several car dealerships in the area. Based on what we've observed, this relationship has been going on significantly longer than the one with James. I stared at the photos in disbelief. There was Linda, arm in arm with a distinguished-looking older man, walking out of the same hotel where she'd met James. The timestamp showed this photo had been taken 2 weeks ago. How long? I asked, my voice hoarse. Based on the pattern of meetings, probably over a year. Maybe longer. A year. Linda had been living a complete double life for over a year, and I'd been too trusting, too busy, or too stupid to notice. Does James know about Richard? I asked. Alan shook his head. From what we can tell, James thinks he's the only one. Richard appears to be more discreet, fewer public appearances, more private meetings. I felt sick. My wife hadn't just betrayed our marriage, she'd been manipulating multiple men, playing them against each other while maintaining the facade of our domestic life. There's more, Alan said reluctantly. Richard Sterling. I think you might recognize him. He's been at several charity events you and Linda attended over the years. The pieces clicked into place. I remembered Richard, now charming, successful, the type of man who commanded attention at social gatherings. Linda had always been friendly with him at those events, but I'd never thought anything of it. She was friendly with everyone. Now I realized those interactions had been the foundation of something much more serious than I could have imagined. That evening, I confronted Linda with everything I knew. I showed her the photos, laid out the timeline, forced her to face the full scope of her betrayal. James and Richard, I said, my voice deadly calm, not just one affair but two. For over a year, you've been living completely separate lives. She broke down completely, admitting to everything. The loneliness had started years ago, she said. She felt neglected, unappreciated, invisible. Richard had noticed her at a charity gala and made her feel special, desired. James had come later, representing youth and excitement. I never meant for it to go this far, she sobbed. I never meant to hurt you. But you did, I replied. You chose to hurt me every single day for over a year. Every lie, every secret meeting, every time you came home and pretended everything was normal. I filed for divorce the next day. The legal process moved more quickly than I'd expected. Linda had no real leverage, most of our assets were in my name, and the evidence of her affairs made any claims of emotional distress ring hollow. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Angela Preston, was ruthless in protecting my interests. Richard Sterling, despite his supposed wealth and influence, didn't seem eager to fight for Linda's financial security during the divorce proceedings. Maybe he was protecting his own reputation, or maybe Linda had overestimated her importance to him. James Morrison disappeared entirely once he learned about Richard. Whether Linda told him or he figured it out on his own, he wanted nothing to do with the complicated mess she'd created. Linda moved out of our house within 2 weeks of the confrontation. She took her personal belongings and left everything else behind. There were no dramatic scenes, no last-minute pleas for forgiveness. She knew there was nothing left to save. The final divorce decree arrived on a Thursday in January, exactly 4 months after that terrible Tuesday when Linda had announced she was going out and everything was going to change. As I sat in my lawyer's office, signing the last of the paperwork, Angela asked if I felt closure. I don't know about closure, I said honestly, but I feel free. And I did. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't living with lies, wasn't being deceived by someone I trusted completely. The betrayal still hurt, probably always would, but the weight of uncertainty was gone. I kept the house, most of our savings, and my dignity. Linda got her freedom and whatever relationships she thought were worth destroying our marriage for. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Jennifer at the grocery store. She asked how I was doing, mentioned that she'd heard through mutual friends that Linda's relationship with Richard hadn't worked out. She seemed to think he was going to take care of her after the divorce, Jennifer said. I guess it didn't turn out that way. I wasn't surprised. Men like Richard Sterling didn't build successful businesses by making poor decisions about complicated women. Once Linda was free, she probably became less appealing to him. And James? I found myself asking. Gone, Jennifer said simply. Once he found out about Richard, he disappeared completely. So Linda had ended up alone, which was probably what she deserved. But I found that I didn't take any satisfaction in her loneliness. I'd moved past the need for revenge or vindication. The months following the divorce were both the hardest and most liberating of my life. I threw myself into therapy, something I probably should have done years earlier. My therapist, Dr. Margaret Walsh, helped me understand that Linda's betrayal wasn't really about me. It was about her own inability to communicate her needs and her choice to seek validation outside our marriage rather than working to fix what was broken inside it. You can't save a marriage when only one person is actually in it, Dr. Walsh told me during one of our sessions. You were trying to maintain something that Linda had already abandoned. Those words hit me hard, but they also brought clarity. I'd spent months blaming myself, wondering what I could have done differently, how I might have seen the signs sooner. But the truth was, Linda had made a deliberate choice to deceive me. That was on her, not on me. I started rebuilding my life piece by piece. First, I tackled the house. Every room held memories of Linda, and while I couldn't erase our shared history, I could change the environment to reflect my new reality. I painted the living room a different color, bought new furniture for the bedroom, converted Linda's former office space into a home gym. The process was therapeutic in ways I hadn't expected. Each change felt like I was reclaiming my space, creating a home that was truly mine, rather than a monument to a failed marriage. Work became more meaningful too. Without the distraction of trying to save my marriage, I could focus on projects that actually interested me. I took on more challenging clients, started mentoring younger accountants in the firm, even considered the possibility of starting my own practice someday. My social life expanded gradually. During the marriage, Linda and I had shared friends, and I'd worried about how the divorce might affect those relationships. Some people did choose sides, gravitating toward Linda or simply fading away because our situation made them uncomfortable. But others rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. My brother Kevin, who lived 3 hours away, started calling more regularly and visiting on weekends. We hadn't been particularly close during my marriage. Linda had always found him annoying, but without her influence, I rediscovered how much I actually enjoyed his company. You seem different, Kevin told me about 6 months after the divorce. More like yourself again. I knew what he meant. During the final years of my marriage, I'd become a smaller version of myself, accommodating Linda's moods and needs while ignoring my own. Now I was remembering who I'd been before I'd defined myself primarily as someone's husband. I started traveling, something Linda had always resisted. She preferred familiar places and routines, but I found myself drawn to new experiences. I took a photography workshop in Santa Fe, spent a long weekend exploring Portland's food scene, even booked a 10-day trip to Ireland that I'd been dreaming about for years. Each trip taught me something new about my own resilience and independence. I could navigate unfamiliar cities, strike up conversations with strangers, make decisions based solely on what I wanted to do. After years of compromise and negotiation, the freedom was intoxicating. But perhaps the most significant change was how I approached relationships. I started dating about 8 months after the divorce, but very cautiously. The betrayal had left me hyper-aware of red flags, suspicious of inconsistencies, quick to notice when someone's words didn't match their actions. I went on dates with several women, some introduced by friends, others met through online dating apps that felt foreign and overwhelming at first. Most of these encounters were pleasant but didn't lead anywhere significant. I was probably too guarded, too analytical, too quick to retreat when I sensed any hint of deception or game playing. Then I met Susan. It was at a bookstore of all places, somewhere Linda had never enjoyed spending time. I was browsing the travel section, looking for guides to New Zealand, my next planned adventure, when a woman about my age asked if I'd been to any of the places featured in the book I was holding. Not yet, I told her, but I'm hoping to change that soon. She smiled, and something about her directness reminded me of what I'd been missing in my interactions with other people. I went there 2 years ago after my divorce, she said. It was exactly what I needed. Beautiful, peaceful, completely different from everything I'd known. We ended up talking for over an hour, first about travel, then about books, eventually about the challenges of rebuilding life after a marriage ends. Susan was 51, a nurse at the local hospital, divorced for 3 years after discovering her ex-husband had been gambling away their savings and lying about it for months. The lies were worse than the money, she told me over coffee the following week, during what had turned into our first official date. I could forgive financial mistakes, but I couldn't forgive being treated like I was too stupid to handle the truth. I understood exactly what she meant. The parallel between our situations wasn't lost on either of us, but rather than bonding over shared victimhood, we found ourselves drawn to each other's strength, the way we'd both chosen to rebuild rather than remain bitter. Susan was everything Linda hadn't been. Direct in her communication, consistent in her actions, generous with her emotions, but realistic about relationships. She didn't play games, didn't test me with manufactured drama, didn't expect me to guess what she was thinking. I'm too old for that nonsense, she said when I commented on her straightforward approach. Life's too short to waste time on people who can't be honest about what they want. We took things slowly, both of us scarred by our previous marriages, but determined not to let those experiences rob us of the possibility of genuine connection. We spent long evenings talking about everything: our work, our families, our dreams for the future, our fears about trying again after betrayal. The first time Susan met my brother Kevin, he pulled me aside afterward and said, "This one's different. She actually sees you." He was right. Susan paid attention to details that Linda had ignored for years. She noticed when I was stressed about work and suggested we take a walk instead of watching television. She remembered that I preferred quiet restaurants to crowded bars, that I was more of a morning person than a night owl, that I actually enjoyed cooking when I had someone appreciative to cook for. More importantly, she created space for me to be myself without judgment. When I mentioned my interest in learning to play guitar, something I'd wanted to do for decades, but Linda had dismissed as impractical, Susan surprised me with beginner lessons for my birthday. "You're never too old to try something new," she said, watching me fumble through my first chords. "And even if you're terrible at it, at least you'll know you tried." The relationship with Susan deepened gradually over the course of a year. We traveled together, met each other's families, began talking seriously about a future together. But throughout it all, I remained cautious about fully committing, still gun-shy from Linda's betrayal. Susan understood my hesitation without taking it personally. "Trust takes time to rebuild," she told me. "I'm not going anywhere, but I also can't prove my trustworthiness to you. That's something you have to discover for yourself." Her patience was both humbling and healing. She never pressured me for guarantees about our future, never demanded declarations of love before I was ready to give them, never made me feel guilty for taking things at my own pace. Meanwhile, through mutual friends and small-town gossip, I heard periodic updates about Linda's life after our divorce. As Jennifer had mentioned, her relationship with Richard Sterling had ended badly within a few months. Apparently, he'd been less interested in supporting her financially than she'd expected, and she'd discovered he was married, something she claimed not to have known, though I suspected that was another lie. James Morrison had disappeared from her life entirely once the extent of her deceptions became clear. According to the gossip mill, Linda had tried to reconcile with him after her relationship with Richard imploded, but he wanted nothing to do with her. She'd moved to an apartment across town, taken a job at a different company, essentially started over in her mid-40s with very little to show for nearly a decade of marriage. I felt no satisfaction in her struggles, but I also felt no urge to help her. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. About 18 months after our divorce was finalized, Linda reached out to me directly for the first time since she'd moved out. She sent a long email apologizing for everything that had happened, claiming she'd learned from her mistakes and asking if we could meet to talk. I showed the email to Susan, who read it thoughtfully before giving me her opinion. "She sounds lonely," Susan said, "and probably broke. But what she doesn't sound is genuinely sorry for what she did to you. She sounds sorry that her choices didn't work out the way she'd hoped. Susan was right. Linda's email focused more on her own regrets and current difficulties than on the pain she'd caused me. She wanted absolution, not reconciliation, and I wasn't in the business of providing either. I deleted the email without responding. 2 years after the divorce, Susan and I were married in a simple ceremony attended by our immediate families and closest friends. It was everything my wedding to Linda hadn't been. Authentic, joyful, based on real knowledge of each other rather than romantic illusions. Standing at the altar with Susan, I realized how much I'd learned about love in the aftermath of Linda's betrayal. Real love isn't just passion and compatibility, though those things matter. Real love is choosing to be truthful even when it's uncomfortable, choosing to work through problems instead of running away from them, choosing to honor your commitments even when they require sacrifice. Linda had taught me what love wasn't. It wasn't lying to protect someone else's feelings. It wasn't staying together just because you'd invested time in the relationship. It wasn't accepting betrayal in the name of forgiveness. Susan showed me what love could be: honest communication, mutual respect, shared values, the willingness to be vulnerable with someone who'd proven themselves trustworthy. During our honeymoon in New Zealand, the trip that had led us to meet each other, Susan and I talked about the paths that had brought us together. Both of us had been betrayed by people we'd trusted completely. Both of us had been forced to rebuild our lives from scratch. Both of us had learned hard lessons about the difference between being in a relationship and being truly known by another person. "I'm grateful for my first marriage," Susan told me as we watched the sunrise over Milford Sound. Not because it was good, but because it taught me to recognize the real thing when I found it. I felt the same way. Linda's betrayal had been devastating at the time, but it had also freed me from a relationship that was built on my assumptions rather than our reality. Without that painful awakening, I might have spent the rest of my life in a marriage that looked successful from the outside but was hollow at its core. Now, 5 years after Linda walked out of our house that October evening, I can honestly say that her betrayal was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Not because I enjoyed being deceived and abandoned, but because it forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself and what I wanted from life. I learned that I was stronger than I'd thought, more resilient than I'd imagined, and worthy of honest love. I learned that starting over isn't a failure. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. Most importantly, I learned that some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. Linda ending our marriage freed me to find something better with Susan. Her lies taught me to value truth. Her betrayal showed me what real commitment looks like. The man I am now, happily remarried, more confident, clearer about my values and boundaries, exists because of what Linda put me through. I wouldn't recommend the experience to anyone, but I'm grateful for where it led me. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is also the thing that saves you from wasting the rest of your life. Linda's betrayal was both my greatest heartbreak and my greatest gift. I'm a better man because of it, and I'm finally with someone who deserves that better version of myself. That's the real victory. Not that Linda got what she deserved, but that I got what I deserved: a second chance at genuine love with someone who values honesty as much as I do. Some betrayals destroy you, others set you free. Mine did both, and I'm better for it.